So greetings to all and welcome to this McCarter at Home event. McCarter at Home is McCarter Theater Center's virtual programming from Princeton, New Jersey in the USA, and its goal is to bridge the isolation gap and be a source of light and art and culture and human connection during these times. My name is Paula Alexson, and I'm McCarter's Artistic Engagement Manager, and it is my great pleasure to moderate the McCarter Alive in Conversation series. And it is a complete honor and a privilege to be here virtually with our special guest, Oskar Eustis, the Artistic Director of New York City's The Public Theater, and his longtime friend, very longtime friend, which we'll get to, and collaborator, McCarter Artistic Director and Resident Playwright, Emily Mann. How wonderful to have you both in public conversation today. Thank you so much.
Great to be here.
Great to be here, Paula.
So you know we have a local, regional, and national audience today with a few folks zooming in from Canada and Europe. And we're streaming live on Facebook as well. So greetings to our Facebook viewers. And a shout out to our colleagues at the Public. Keep on keeping on. And a special word of appreciation to those of you who submitted questions for Oskar and Emily. And thank you everyone for joining us. If you will, Emily and Oskar, some of the questions submitted came from students in the Princeton University Lewis Center for the Arts Program and Theater, some who are just completing their classes and their final semester like Chamari, and others who are in their first year of study like Anna. And I thought we might dedicate today's conversation to our newest generation of theater artists at Princeton and beyond, whose training and work and art making has been interrupted, and they're seeking answers and assurance about the future of theater and advice and inspiration on how to cope and focus in the present moment, no pressure. So to the undergraduate and graduate students and apprentices and fellows at our colleague institutions across the country, and to our McCarter apprentices, mwah, we're thinking of you and dedicating this hour to you.
Yes.
So hard segue. Oskar, this is our third installment of McCarter Alive in Conversation, and we've been kicking things off with quarantine current moment check-in, more related to the personal than the professional. So may I ask, where are we zooming in with you? With whom are you quarantined? And how is it going for you in your day-to-day experience?
I'm quarantined in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, in my house with my wife and 29-year-old daughter, who had the good sense to move back into the house about a month before the quarantine hit. And when I say good sense, I mean that only selfishly. It is a really real pleasure for me to have her here. So the three of us are together, we're the family, and we've been here for 8 weeks. I had the bug, but almost 2 months ago now. I was hospitalized for a few days, and I'm fine. And as near as I can tell, everybody in the family is fine. So, you know, our personal situation is privileged and healthy.
We're glad you're here.
Absolutely.
We heard you're cooking tonight.
So I cook every night, actually.
Okay. Oh. So I just noticed, this is for both of you, in the New York Times on Monday, that they've run this compilation of micro essays under the title One Bright Thing. I don't know if you caught that, but the premise is that they asked 18 veteran writers across departments in the newsroom to write a response to the prompt. In these dark days, what's the one bright thing that lightened your mood amid the current bleakness? So for both of you, is there one bright thing that you might share with us?
Emily, you first. You're better at optimism.
It's all an act. Well, the one bright thing, I don't want to sound gooey, but it's true. I am quarantined at home with my wonderful husband. And it is wonderful to wake up and realize, oh my God, this wasn't a dream. Go downstairs, see him, give him a big kiss, and have my first cup of coffee and look out the window and realize, like, Oskar, oh my goodness, we are so privileged. I'm looking out at a beautiful cherry tree, and we are so fortunate that all of us are well. Our entire family is well. And so far, so good. So I know that there is so much misery out there, and we have lost so many dear friends and colleagues. So we count our blessings every day.
Oskar?
Honestly, I would say that the biggest bright spot that we have is that this tragedy, and it is a tragedy, is actually providing some solace for a previous tragedy. We lost our son and Cal's brother 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago. And in the years since, it has always been hard for us to feel like a complete family. We felt like a three-legged table. And now this time together has actually remolded and reshaped our internal sense of a family. And we feel solid in a way as a group that we haven't felt in 5.5 years. So that's, for me, that's optimistic.
Yeah, well, Oskar, it's wonderful.
Thank you.
It's been a good thing. It's been a good thing.
So I've curated a conversational journey for today that touches upon your history as friends and artistic collaborators, your experience as artistic directors in nonprofit institutions in the American theater, subtitled The Joys and Challenges, and your thoughts on the state of the art or the business in the midst of the COVID crisis. And actually the preponderance of submitted questions sort of focus on COVID and the future of the theater. So we'll deal with that last. Feel free to deviate from the path and go into the woods or into the weeds, whatever you so desire, my friends. You're much more interesting than my questions, so please do feel free to do that. That being said, I want to ask you to talk about where and how you first met and about your earliest collaboration with one another. But first, I wonder if you might talk about how or when you first became aware of one another, either by reputation in the field or through mutual friends or professional connections. Emily, do you want to start?
No, I want Oskar to start.
Yeah, no, she's right. I should start because nobody knew who the hell I was when I read Emily's play Still Life, which was, I thought, one of the most brilliant and piercing things I'd read. I had just joined on after a tumultuous childhood to the Eureka Theater in San Francisco. I was about 21 years old, and I was sure that the play was too radical structurally. I felt like a performance art piece. I didn't think my other colleagues at the Eureka would go for it. I'm happy to say that they did, and then this was this before I'd met Emily. I didn't know anything about her. I just knew she'd written this brilliant play, and somehow we get the rights to do it, which I was utterly thrilled by.
And that's how I got to meet Oskar. He's right. I didn't know who he was. I had heard vaguely about the Eureka in San Francisco and heard they were doing amazing work, and they were doing political work, political plays in a way that I knew no one else in America was. But as I remember, they were mainly British writers, but that made sense because there were not many American writers writing political work that I knew of anyway. Anyway, I remember Oskar calling with Tony Taccone, his comrade in arms, and they said, we'd like you to come out and see our production of Still Life. And Still Life is, for those of you who don't know it, a really traumatic play. And for me to see it again was going to be hard. And also at that point, because we had won we had swept the Obies Awards that year. That's the Off-Broadway Awards for Production of the Year and play and all this sort of stuff. But a lot of people were doing it. So I said, I don't know. And so Oskar basically said, we've got to talk to you about your play. Well, we had what ended up being, for me, a life-changing conversation. I had never heard a more astute analysis of my play. I'd never talked to a pair of directors or a dramaturg who understood the play on such a deep level. And I thought, oh my God, who are these people? I have to get out there and meet them. So I got on an airplane and I went out to San Francisco, and the rest is history. We became fast friends.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's when this kind of thing happens, and forgive me for talking like an old person to the younger people, but it's often instantaneous. It's often just immediately, you know, there's somebody who not only respect and admire, that's important, but even more important, who resonates with the way you see the world, who sees the world in ways that make sense to you. And very often, and this was the experience I had with Emily, you're just shocked that somebody else like that exists. You know, I knew Barry Keefe was like that. I knew David Edgar was like that. I knew Trevor Griffiths and Carol Churchill were like that. But you were right. We did all British plays. We didn't think there were Americans who did that. And I you know, it felt like 10 minutes after we met that we started talking about Harvey Milk and commissioning Execution of Justice. And but the key, though, I'm sorry, I'm an old teacher. The thing that just feels so right is you feel that connection, and then you, gosh darn it, you hang on to it, you nurture it, you don't let it go. And so as soon as we connected on Still Life, it was, what are we going to do next? How are we going to do it? Let's go. And we were into the Execution of Justice process, which was, you know, one of the most rewarding and intense processes I've been through in my life. It was years together.
Yeah, me too.
Emily, in your collection of documentary plays entitled Testimonies, you write the following dedication for Execution of Justice. This play is dedicated to Oskar Eustis, dramaturg, who understood the trials. Many thanks to the Eureka Theater and artistic director Tony Taccone, who risked the verdict. Could you speak to the context or subcontext of that dedication and talk a little bit about the process?
Wow, where do we begin, Oskar? I'll try to start and then chime in. It's interesting because it's so long ago. It's 40 years ago, but it is still so vivid. I remember realizing that this was something that I wanted to do with the Eureka Company and for that community. And I found the story shocking and beautiful because it was clearly an unhealed wound in that city. In 1981, this is the murders or assassinations of City Supervisor Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone. And I just had a sense, given that besides the unhealed wounds of losing those two leaders in such a violent way, was also the verdict of the trial. That when it came down, where he basically got a slap on the wrist for what seemed like two premeditated murders in the first degree, the city erupted in rioting. And the shock of the verdicts was something that rocked the city, and it was still rocking the city when I was there in 1981. So my gut was to say, okay, let's look at that trial. Perhaps the story is in the trial or embedded somehow in the trial. And in those days, it was very hard to get a transcript. Also, it cost, if you could, way too much money for the Eureka Theater to afford. And now I'm going to hand it over to Oskar to say how he managed to begin that process with researching the trial.
Well, it was hard, and you know, you had to literally pay the court stenographer who had made the trial transcript to duplicate it for you. It was their personal problem. It was insane. It took us over a month to just get our hands on the transcript of the trial. But then, you know, what Emily did was, I think, a direct descendant of what she'd done in Still Life, because she understood something about trauma. And in Still Life, the trauma was contained to the individual characters, one of whom had committed a traumatic atrocity in Vietnam, and the other two women who were responding to that. But in Execution, she understood that it was the trauma of an entire city, and how to dramatize that trauma while telling the story. So it's, you know, in a way, the oldest dramaturgical problem in the book. How do you get the exposition in while moving the, and of course, a trial is a great vehicle for that, because a trial is all about moving forward to a verdict by moving backwards through what happened. But what she figured out is that the whole point of that trial was that it was an inadequate trial. The trial didn't do its job of social catharsis. And so she invented this thing, the chorus of uncalled witnesses, who basically, all of the interviewing that we did around the city with people who'd experienced this, she called them as witnesses to the trial on stage. So they would interrupt the trial and replay the trial that should have happened. And so every night, and when we did this in the Bay Area, it was unbelievable because the audience was literally shouting at the stage. Every night we would replay the trial with the completely insane hope that this time it would turn out differently. This time the verdict would be different. And of course, it never did turn out differently, because ours was just the uncalled witnesses. Ours was the show trial. It wasn't the actual trial. But the way, you know, the thing that you understood, Em, and that I just still adore so much about that play, is that it was, the traumatic reenactment was reenacting over and over the events. But by putting them in the form of the play, it became a ritual that I think literally purged, in Aristotle's sense, created catharsis for those people watching it. And I had never, in my young experimental theater life, I had, you know, spent far too much time in the avant-garde in Soho navel gazing in the 70s. Although we did great things, but still, it was pretty incestuous. I had never had the experience of theater that was actually a civic event. It was not just a play. It was actually doing something to the city of San Francisco. And that was intoxicating. And talk about changing your life. That changed my life forever. That's all I've been doing ever since, is going after that high again. It was
Made him
so
an
good.
addict.
Yeah. Well, you know, it unleashed the real power of the theater. And that's when you sort of go, oh, this isn't about plays that make you cry a little bit. This is actually an event in the life of your community. And once it becomes that, the power sort of magnifies in a way that's breathtaking. So I'm sorry, that's
No,
a
you
long
just,
speech, but
you
that's
just,
my memory of you writing that play.
Emily,
I love that.
Emily, am I right that Oskar just made the perfect commercial for the community reading we're going to do in?
Yes, I don't think Oskar knows about this. Explain to him what we're doing.
Well, stay tuned. We'll talk about it at the very end. We have a little ground to cover, but still related. That play, it premiered at Actors Theater of Louisville, co-directed by Oskar and Tony. It won Louisville's Great American Play Contest in 1984 and eventually had its Broadway premiere in 1986. And I suddenly feel like I'm going to stick my foot in it. But Emily, you directed it on Broadway, not Oskar.
Right.
Could you talk about that?
Well, it was an interesting process. Some of it painful, some of it wonderful. They launched the play, the Eureka, and the Eureka had actually burned down, and Berkeley Rep actually. The premiere was Eureka, but it was on the Berkeley Rep stage. And it went all over the country. And I kept on working on it. And then I directed it at the Guthrie. And then there was interest in Broadway. And so it just, you know, evolved that way.
And if I could just say, it was the correct and natural evolution of the show. Emily obviously was always a director as well as a playwright. I was 13 years old or whatever it was. You know, I had not yet made my Broadway directing debut. Oh, wait a minute, I still haven't. You know, it's just, you know, it was the right thing for the play to happen, and there was, you know, whatever the details of the day-to-day on it, it was just absolutely a blessed trail for the play.
Oskar, I do want to talk to you. I want to ask you and Emily to sort of both reflect on your multi multiple gifts as artists. But I'd love to hear from you about your sort of adoption of dramaturg as part of your artistic identity. And if you might explain for folks who might not know the term, what a dramaturg is.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. For me, it was a very specific trajectory, which is just before I met Emily, I had spent 2.5 years living in the German-speaking world in Switzerland. And actually, my parents were living in East Germany, so I was in East Germany a lot, but working in theater in that world. And that was where I was introduced to the job function of a dramaturg. And in Germany at that time, and even this, the function is quite different than it's turned out to be in America, because most of the great German theaters had classical repertories, and the dramaturgs were essentially there as the resident intellectuals who would both assemble these enormous programs that the German-speaking theater had, but also come up with conceptually the ways of thinking about the seasons, of thinking about the program, of articulating why we're going to do Schiller's Die Räuber this year, and we're going to do Kleist's The Broken Jug the next year. It was, just fascinating to me. And I had never known that such a job existed. The smart guy who reads a lot in the theater. And that just seemed to me such an idyllic job. And it also, I quickly found that I love directing, but the dramaturgy is much more a perfect match with my skill set and with what I have to bring to the table. And so when I came back to the States, I started calling myself a dramaturg. And literally, this is at the age of 21. Nobody had any idea what I was talking about. And I sort of made it up. And what happened, it's very interesting. I wasn't the cause of this, but I was of the first wave of dramaturgs, people like Morgan Jeunesse and Mame Hunt, who in the United States, who very rapidly, Kathleen Dimick, very rapidly changed the European model to focus on new play development. And American dramaturgy has always, since the earliest days of the late 70s, early 80s, dramaturgy ended up focusing on new play development rather than classics. And that whole, the whole profession now really was created out of a transformation of the European idea of dramaturgy into a specifically American idea of dramaturgy. And now I feel like the skill set that, there's things I know and things I've read, and that's nice. But the basic skill set that I think I bring is my ability to get passionately interested in somebody else's talent and somebody else's vision, and then do everything I can to help bring it into existence. And it's a small talent, but it's one I'm glad I have.
Emily, I know you want to jump right in there to talk
too.
about.
So not a small talent. There
his,
is a reason why I dedicated the play to Oskar, and there's a reason why Tony Kushner also will say he could not have written the play Angels in America without Oskar. It is a very particular talent. Oskar can see a play whole, even before perhaps the writer can, and knows where to push and where to, challenge. I'll speak for myself. I'm not going to speak for Tony or anyone else, but I know that Oskar can hold the big idea in his head and then go right for all the details that will amplify and strengthen each moment as you're making this huge piece. And I don't know anyone like Oskar. I have worked with fantastic dramaturgs, but Oskar has a particular talent that writers need. And when you connect with Oskar, as I have, he basically spoils you for anyone else.
Yeah, although the other thing,
it was one of the most thrilling collaborations of my life. So
it was a great time. And I think at one point we'd figured out we'd worked on it in 12 different cities or something like that. We spent Christmas in the Twin Cities going over together. It was used to carry, before computers, right? So Emily would literally carry a duffel bag with all of the draft You know,
I mean, it weighed a ton.
it was crazy, but it was thrilling. And you know, just to say, that it's also not a fungible talent in that the only way it works is if I love a playwright and I love a play. You can't do. It's not some set of rules you can slap on. What
Right.
happened, you know, and that you were the first playwright I fully had that experience with, and you know, then there's a certain amount of brains involved in it, but also what's just involved in it is a lot about just trying to think, what do you need now, Em? How could I help? And sometimes that was like making dinner, or you know, staying out of the way while you took your pregnancy test.
You brought it up.
He did. He spilled the beans.
I just know Nick is
And
in the house, so I couldn't
my
resist.
son and grandson, I think, are watching right now. Yes, in fact, we were doing research in San Francisco when I suddenly was feeling very queasy. And I think we were having a lunch. I think Mike Weller and Kathy Weller had ended up dropping by in San Francisco, and I remember saying, "Oh, I feel so queasy." And Kathy said, "I'm going across the street where there was a drugstore." And she said, "You're pregnant. I can tell." And the next morning, I found out I was. And I think my then husband, Nick's dad, was the second person to know. I think Oskar was the first.
I will never testify to that. It's not my story. But it was, you know, it was, I think part of what you're obviously hearing in this is that we grew to be very, very close friends. And, you know, I love Emily very, very much. And the process of working on it is, it's a personal business. It's why we like being artists. It's why we like being in the theater. There isn't some thick line you can draw between this is private life, this is professional life. That's not what artists do. And so that time working together was immensely satisfying, and again set a template for me that has guided me in the 36 years since the premiere of Execution.
Me too. And I have to say, since you know this play so well, Paula, I could not have written Greensboro or Requiem without having worked with Oskar on Execution of Justice. Again, trauma of a community and bringing that to a community. I wasn't starting from zero.
And what's also interesting is how meaningful, even if you're not a part of the communities that you're writing for or about, how the experience for the reader or for the audience is still personal.
Oh yeah, one hopes.
One of the basic things about,
we've seen it.
And I think one of the basic joys of theater is the continual rediscovery that no matter how different they look, other people aren't that different from you. And that there's a huge commonality human experience. And if you write really specifically and well about San Francisco, you're going to affect a lot of people who've never been to California.
And as well as an unfortunate commonality of time and humans across time.
Yeah.
So you both assumed the role of artistic directors at nonprofit theaters around 4 years from one another, and have been inspirational leaders in the profession. Emily, you for 30 years at McCarter Theater Center, and Oskar, for you 35 years or so, Eureka Theater, then the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles, Trinity Rep in Providence, Rhode Island, and then at the Public for the last 15 years. Would you sort of both collaborate together to share with the audience the job description of an artistic director in the nonprofit American theater? I said the joys and challenges, and what the general joys and challenges are of that.
Well, we have similar job titles, but in some ways, our daily lives probably differed also, because I was both an artistic director and the resident playwright here. I also was artistic leader of a much smaller operation than the Public Theater. So it's more like what Oskar was doing earlier. But I still, I believe in artists running institutions. There needs to be an artistic vision, and I consider Oskar, he calls himself a dramaturg, but he's an artist, that the love of the art is what is needed to run a theater, and each one of us has a very particular vision. And Oskar's and mine are not very far apart, because we are dedicated to giving voice to the voiceless. We love the classic repertoire, as he has with in his previous theaters, but very much so at the public, looking at the classic repertoire in conversation with new work, that we are dedicated to serving our communities in all ways, and our education and engagement is core to the mission of McCarter and is part of the artistic staff. Now, a day for me as an artistic director, really, you can't describe, because no day is like another day. Right. You have to be thinking about the place and have a great, you know, it's Oscar Wilde's quote that I had up on my bulletin board for years, which is, artists talk about money and amateurs talk about art. You have to keep in mind how to keep the artistic community going, and at the same time keep your institution financially solvent. Constantly looking in the big picture with your staff, and I work very collectively, how best to set up systems that both work for the staff, the shops, the artists, the board. How do you make all of this work synergistically so that you have a living, breathing community that can bring out the best work and put it forward to the community? And we did it not just on our stages, but in the schools and the halfway houses and the senior centers, and, you know, wherever we needed to be. So it was, for me, it brought out, I was deeply gratified on a activist level, the activist side of me and the political side of me, as well as the artist side of me, wanting so much to support my my colleagues in this, and then that side of me that likes to see how institutions are built. But it meant really 90-hour weeks, because you have your office job and keeping all of those meetings going. Then you have all the meetings that you're doing with artists, and then you have your fundraising, and then you want to see the work of your colleagues. So it's running into town, into New York, and seeing that, or getting on an airplane and seeing it elsewhere in the country. It's also, in a lot of ways, yeah, you're going sort of morning till night, and it's a rough job. Also, if you add on to that I was still trying to write, which I did in the interstices, you know, every vacation, or gosh, there was a day on a weekend. I mean, that was a lot. Perhaps it's why right now, as I'm winding down and I'm in a forced isolation and a forced stay at home, that I'm finding, oh, this is a rather nice way to live. I'm enjoying the peace, the quiet, the ability to really look inwards and write. So it's quite a fascinating job, but it asks for all of you. All of you. What would you say, Ask? I've been talking too much.
No, not at all. Listen to you, I'm wondering why on earth I want to do my job.
I know, right? It's so crazy.
So I think two things that I would just add is that in my particular case, I'm actually quite bad at systems. I'm not a manager, so I have been incredibly dependent on my managing or executive directors over the years, from Bill Wingate, Edgar Dobie, Pat Egan,
Yes.
Laura
Well,
Madison.
I am too. Yeah.
And, now I've Patrick Willingham, who I'm determined to never have another partner. I'm determined to retire before Patrick can slip
I
away from my
hear
touch,
you.
because I don't want to go through it. He's great. He's a genius manager. But the fact that he's so good at managing actually lets me sort of refine what I'm there to do. And I'm there to define over and over and over again what the purpose of our work is, and to apply it to the individual shows and programs we're doing. And
Right.
doing my best to make everybody, from the staff of the theater to the artists we work with, to the audience, to the philanthropic community, everybody understand the coherence of who we are. And that, so, in a way, my job is to be a windbag. My job is to try and talk all of this into alignment so that people can see the logic and the interconnectedness of, we are doing this show because we have this mission, we're doing it this way because this is what our goal is, we're reaching this audience because that relates. And I'm incredibly lucky at the Public, which is, I inherited a theater whose mission I agreed with 100%. And it's not entirely coincidence. It's because when I was a teenager, when I was 16 years old, I wandered in the lobby of the Public Theater, and it formed my idea of what a theater was supposed to be. And then I went out to Europe and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Rhode Island and attempted to recreate the Public in all of those places. And then finally they gave in and just gave me the damn job. And, but I'm a child of Joe Papp's vision of what the theater should be. And so what is beautiful for me about the institution I'm at is I never feel like it's my vision. It's my choices about how to articulate the vision. So I better have good taste. I better be smart about the vision. But the vision is a vision that frankly was always bigger than Joe too. Joe and Joanne Acolytis and George Wolfe, my predecessors, all contributed essential things to defining the role of that theater. And now, in a way, it's my job to make sure that not only the institution, but the mission that the institution upholds becomes a permanent part of the New York landscape. Because the Public's always been a little bit of a fabulous invalid, boom and bust, and the art's great, but the management's crazy. We've tried to change that. I think we have successfully changed that in the last
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there is a difference there that, I was also deeply touched by Joe. So I stand on others' shoulders for sure, but I came in and I articulated the vision and the mission. I didn't inherit it.
And you've run this theater like an artist, which is what you are. And that involves also a singularity of vision that is not exactly my thing. I feel like a lot of what's had to happen at the Public is it's a very big tent. We do musicals, we do Shakespeare, we do new plays, we do experimental theater, we have a cabaret. And sort of the point of the Public is that, we're grabbing all these different expressions of theater and saying, just like we say about the audience, you have more in common with each other than you have separate. You shouldn't have separate institutions for experimental theater and Shakespeare. You should all come under this roof, which means that, I have to have a perhaps shallower but broader taste of what I'm going to respond to and bring in, because, again, it's not my individual vision. It's the vision of what the institution's supposed to be. So, which is why I think I found the right job.
I want to sort of combine a question from one of our attendees and my next question for you. The attendee asks, how have you each impacted and shaped each other as artistic directors? And my sort of tag on to that is, how have you, what have been your personal highlights as collaborating artistic directors?
I just got to say, I hope you guys realize from the story that I'm infinitely younger than Emily. clearly generations. But it's not about biological age. It's that Emily was my mentor. Emily was a highly successful, established and trailblazing artist when I was still trying to figure out what a stage manager was at the Eureka Theater. So for me, a huge amount of what this is Emily was the person who was a model for me of what a politically engaged artist could be, an experimental artist who was nonetheless devoted to accessibility could be, of the idea that you could live an activist artistic life in the mainstream American theater, and remember, I was, still wearing leotards and doing Grotowski exercises. When, so, that is the her influence on me has been huge. She helped shape the entire direction of my career and profession.
Did you know that, Em?
No.
It's true. You did too.
No.
You just didn't want to admit it to yourself, but it's true.
Oh,
Absolutely true.
Oscar, my goodness.
I'm your epigoni. And then, I don't know, but I've thrilled with our Terrell collaboration.
That was fantastic.
The brother-sister plays. Terrell.
The brother-sister plays, yeah.
I mean, it's one of the things
that
I'm
was so
proudest of in
important
my
to do
career.
together.
Yeah. Do you want to talk some about it?
Well, there was a woman who was with us for a while. I don't think you ever knew her, Paula, named Kimati Porter.
I got 1 year with her. 1 year with her.
It's an extraordinary woman from Chicago, African-American, just a few years younger than I, but an intern, she came in on a fellowship actually with Mara Isaacs, who of course was another just my right arm for, 18 years. And Kimati was given a sort of the mission to go out and find exciting young writers coming up and writers of color. And one of the people that she knew from Chicago was Terrell.
Wow.
And so while he was still at Yale, she was in touch with him. And she one day just handed me In the Red and Brown Water. And I opened the first page and I went, oh my God, who is this? It was just, I had not heard a voice like it leaping off the page. The only other time that happened to me was with Nilo, by the way, Nilo Cruz. And I went, oh my God, this guy. And I couldn't put it down. And then she said, oh, and there's another one. And then she gave me the brother-sister plays, which I know is one of your favorite plays, Oscar, right?
Yeah.
Oh, Brother Size.
Brother Size.
Oh, sorry, Brother Size. And we've got to work with this guy. And so we started a relationship. I think he was in his 3rd year at Yale, and we started out with Brother Size. That's what we could afford. It was a cast of 3. And we started working, and then he said it's part of a trilogy, and he was in the midst of writing The Secret of
Marcus, or The Secret of Sweet.
Marcus,
yeah.
The Secret of Sweet. And I said, well, let's hear them all. And we heard them all and said, oh my God, we've got to do them all. And then I think you and I got in touch, Oscar, and you also had been gobsmacked by them, right? I can't remember the order now.
It was funny. I mean, Brother Size, we literally produced 3 times in 4 years. The first thing we did is, it was his 2nd year thesis play from the Yale School of Drama. And we literally picked up the thesis production and plunked it down, actors and all, into our Under the Radar Festival.
Taya Alagic had directed.
Right. And then we did it again as a full production in our season. And by this point, we were talking about, doing all of it, the trilogy. And I remember saying, I remember saying to Trill, Emily really loves these 2. Should we do it together? And he said, of course, she's my people. So we did it, and it was again, and it was yet a 3rd production for us with a different director of Brother Size.
Right.
And I am that production was Tina Longo and Robert
stunning.
O'Hara directed the 3 different pieces, was just fantastic. And Terrell obviously has gone on to prove to the world what really magnificent writer is. But
A great writer, and also now chair of playwriting at Yale School of Drama, isn't he still?
he is, and he has that little Oscar to keep him company for Moonlight. But
Oh, yes, of course.
the thing that I don't think is surprising at all is that Emily and I both responded so powerfully to the same writer, because it's the same things we've always responded to.
Right.
And I would also say audiences. I mean, one of my most beautiful moments at a student matinee was crying with the students as we tried to start the post-show discussion after The Brothers' Sighs with Terrell with us. None of us capable of even catching our breath.
It's the only time in my life I flew my brother in so that we could sit next to each other and watch Brothers' Sighs. And I've never felt moved to do anything similar before. I just thought, I need to see this play with my brother. Yeah. Love that.
I'd like to ask an artistic director related question before we move, this is from our audience, before we move into sort of the COVID questions. Jarrell Henderson, who's a director and theater professor in Chicago, asks, I'm interested in working at the highest levels of American and international theater. However, I have, pardon me, my dog is deciding that it's time for her to bark right now. He says, I have many misgivings about how theater is created and produced commercially. Here comes my wife to take the dog out of the room. What advice would you give as to how to best thrive in an environment you wish to change?
Whoa.
Marx said, you'll forgive the gendered pronoun, men make history, but they do not make it in conditions of their own choosing. None of us would choose conditions that we're in, whether it's COVID-19 or gone in the teeth late monopoly capitalism. The entire point is to figure out from your core what you believe in, how do you interact with the world that you find in a way that is both possible and livable for you, and hopefully makes the world a better place. I didn't touch the commercial theater until I was in my 30s, which again, maybe late 30s, when you brought up the question about executive justice, it never occurred to me that I was going to go to Broadway. That was not my world. And what you can always do is seek for colleagues who respect you, who you respect, who you feel like you have some commonality with, and then clutch them and treat them for what they are, your most valuable resource on the planet. And don't be separating them by artistic directors. Don't be separating them by money. Don't work and see if you can add more people to that, because that's the way you build a theater career that is unique and different, is by who the people that you can share vision with. And it always takes a group of people to change things. But if you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own. There are plenty of cracks and interstices and contradictions within the commercial world. There are plenty within the capitalist world. There's plenty of ways to get in and do meaningful work without acceding to or selling out to a system you don't believe in. But you got to have colleagues to do it with. You got to have comrades. You can't do it by yourself.
I would agree entirely. I would say the exact same thing as Oskar.
So making sort of the turn into the COVID crisis, the questions ranged from Judy Zimmerman and Landon Jones asking, as a result of the pandemic, how do you see theater in America changing? Karen Sisti, I'm going to give you a list of things and you grasp onto the ones that you want to most answer. Karen Sisti, who's the founder of our Shakespeare Community Reading Group. Hi, Karen. She asks, how can theater work with social distancing? Donald Sanborn asks, what does live theater have to do to rebound? And Michael Woke asks, how long might it be? And how can theater makers make the best use of their time while on this forced hiatus? So how will American theater change? How can we do it with social distancing? Can we do it? And what should we be doing in the meantime?
Well, I'll start, Oscar, but you know, this is what we're all in the midst of wrestling with. We are the industry that will probably be the last to reopen in a recognizable way. We have to be in close proximity with each other to create the work and to share the work. Large groups of people, or even, well, small groups of people if you need to, but you still need an audience to gather. What is theater? It is live. What do you need? You need the story, you need a performer, and you need a receiver of the work, right? So it can morph in all different ways. What I think I'm cheered by, as I look to history, and we've had the plagues before. Shakespeare in 1606 ended up writing 3 of his masterpieces in quarantine: Antony and Cleopatra, Macbeth, and help me, and Lear. Thank you. In fact, I'm working on Lear on my off hours right now, and it's called Lear in the Time of COVID. So we know that the theaters reopen once they close, and we know that we have had in the past times when we've had to hibernate, work, and create in more isolation, and then come back out and share the work. That's one model. However, I think we may be looking at something different here. I think we will be coming out into a terrible financial time that will be possibly even worse than the Great Depression. Will people have the money to go to the theater? Will they be feeling secure enough to go to the theater? When will we know that we have either a vaccine or a medication that will give us some expectation that we're not risking our lives to go to the theater? All these questions are brewing. So what I think so many of us are doing right now, certainly writers I know, we're hunkering down and we're doing our work. But what are theaters actually doing and producers actually doing? I think and then I'm leaving running a theater, so I'm very interested in what Oskar is talking about. You know, we have these kinds of conversations. We're keeping in contact with each other electronically, artists and collaborators, and we're keeping in touch with our audiences. But I think when we come up out of this, we're going to be looking at making theater in different ways. I think it's inevitable that we are going to be changed by this. I don't think we all know in what ways yet, but I certainly think we're going to have to be doing it more frugally. We may also be looking at ways to speak to, you know, smaller groups and in serial ways. I think that we may see how the electronic revolution we're dealing with right now impacts the way we work. And how will that impact us? I don't think we know. Right now, I think a lot of us are asking big questions, but I think one of the good things that may come out of it is we're going to have to strip down to the essentials and the essence of what theater is all about. And remember, Oskar, we did it in the 60s and 70s with Grotowski and Peter Brook, and we said, what's the minimum of what we need to tell a story? So I think all these things are swirling in my mind, but I don't have answers, but I have questions that excite me. I think it can be exhilarating.
I agree with everything you said, Em, and you know what I would add to it is we have to both be frugal about how we make it, but we have to be very, very clear about why we're necessary. I think
Yes.
when we come out of this, there's going to be a huge demand on us to prove that we are an important part of the recovery from this, because the demand for resources is going to be everywhere. And if we can't demonstrate that we have something to offer that nobody else does, we are going to be rightfully neglected in the economic recovery that follows. But the other thing I want to do is I want to use myself as a model of idiocy. Antonio Gramsci, a great Italian communist, once advocated pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. And so I've been trying to model it, and I've been very pessimistic. 3 weeks ago, I was saying to anybody who would listen, we are not going to turn ourselves into a digital company. The theater requires live presence. I'm not going to suddenly become something else. And then Richard Nelson proposes to me that we might do this Zoom play with the Apples. And I go, oh, that's a great idea. And we throw ourselves into it. Last Wednesday, we put up this play written, in days for Zoom, about a Zoom conversation between characters who Richard created a decade ago, got the actors, did it. And 4 days of streaming it, we had 50,000 views from 30 countries. And suddenly, and it was wonderful. And suddenly I go, oh, actually, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we actually have to make a lot of digital work. I also have been very confidently saying theater won't come back as long as there's social distancing. Nobody's going to go to the theater if they're afraid of getting sick. So we're not going to remove modes of seats. We're not going to do that. And then my extremely bright friend, David, who I was on a Zoom call with earlier today, said, you might want to look at that. I'm not sure that premise is correct. And by the end of the half hour, we're agreeing, okay, what our job is now is we should come up with a couple of models of how we might do social distance theater. And then we're going to put together a panel of epidemiologists and doctors and people who understand this and actually talk through the practicality of that. Now, will that lead somewhere? I have no idea. But I think for me, again, it's the model of be skeptical about what we have to do, but be incredibly energetic about pursuing the opportunities that avail to you. You're not allowed to give up. You're not allowed to sit back and say, well, I guess I'm taking a break from history, or I'm taking a break from my mission, or taking a break from my job. Now, that's not to say you can't write or relax or retreat. Or I have a friend who went on a 6-day silent retreat at home last week. Contemplation is an essential part of anybody's life and art. And if you could take advantage of quarantine to do some of that, God bless you. But you're doing that contemplation in the service of how you're going to serve the world when you come back, not in the service. So we have to be scrappy. We have to take advantage of all of the obstacles that are given to us. And we take advantage of them by figuring out what can we learn from them. And how can we produce within them? How can we continue to fill our mission? And I just think the best of you out there are going to surprise all of us with what we come up with. None of us know. That's why we're in the arts, because artists invent things that nobody's ever thought of before. And once they're invented, you go, of course, why didn't we think of that?
Yeah, I agree, Oskar. I think it's very exciting. And this idea of why are we essential? I have a feeling when you spend all day on Zoom meetings, boy, do you want to have a live connection. And as wonderful as I think some of the work we're going to create is going to be, and I adored Richard's play, and leave it to Richard Nelson to figure this out, right? I mean, to just make a seamless creation using the medium of the moment to make the play, I felt like I was a voyeur on one of our weekly nightmarish cocktail hours where no one knows how to find the Zoom button or find the the mute or the picture, and also the beauty of the connection that we all need. So it was a beautiful, beautiful piece of work. But I think we will keep finding these revelations. And I also think that people are going to flock back to live event when we can do it and when we can do it safely. And, it might be, there's a site-specific producer who's been speaking to me, and she's putting together a piece where we're all writing these 10-minute plays, 3 to 10-minute plays, and if someone comes in and they come in one at a time, or two at a time, and they view it and they experience it and then go on to the next room. There are 12 rooms and it's going to be circulating and it goes on all day. So, I mean, I think we're going to have some very interesting ideas in the waiting period. And then on the other side, I hope we'll have that more people than just your friend took a 6-day silent meditation and is coming up with deeper and more beautiful and more exciting and groundbreaking work than they would have if they were in their usual pace of racing from pillar to post. So
our Lears, our Macbeths, our Antony.
Yeah.
But if I can just say one other thing, is there's one other test that's going to be facing us. It's facing us now, and it's really going to be facing us, which is, are we going to continue this deadly plunge to authoritarianism, nationalism, and xenophobia that seems to be taking over not just the United States, but the world.
The world.
India to Great Britain. Or are we going to use this time of stress to actually further democratize, further respect egalitarianism, further realize that our destinies are tied together? There's no moment this reminds me as much of the 1930s, where, again, every country in the world was faced with the same dilemma, and every country made their choice. They either went to fascism or they went to an expansion of democracy. And you know, we are, it is not exaggerating to say we are in a very similar moment. If we don't reverse the political tides that we are on, it's not going to matter what plays we put on.
That's right.
Oscar, I promised you that I'd get you out by 5:30. I've already broken. Can I ask for 5 more minutes of you before you turn into a chef?
Okay.
Before we completely close, I'd love for you to talk about the Play at Home project.
Oh, sure.
But first, I'd love to privilege the 2 questions, and I think you've answered these actually along the way, but the 2 questions from our Princeton University Lewis Center for the Arts students who are with us today. They're related questions, yet informed by where the 2 question askers are in their academic experience. So first we have a question from Jamari White-Mink, who's a graduating senior and a director. And Jamari asks, what would be your advice to theater makers hoping to enter into the industry at this time?
It's the same advice I'd actually offer at any time, which is do your best to become yourself. There is, and obviously I've talked about finding your colleagues and finding your cohort, but I can tell you, as a guy who employs thousands of artists a year, I am never looking for somebody who can do anything. I'm looking for actors, directors, writers, designers who have something to offer, who have a vision. And the only way you can have something to offer is to become the human being that is the best version of you. And I know that's not technical advice. That's not about where to send your resume, but I believe it is so much more important than anything else. And the difference between people who I see are able to sustain lives in the field and people who aren't, are those people able to sustain lives are people who become very specifically who they are, and in so doing, attract people's interest in working with them, producing them, and watching them.
For that. The next question, again, is related, but just from a different perspective. Anna Allport, who's completing her first year, undergraduate year, asks, how can college student artists plan for arts careers and support theater in the world in crisis? And she says, thank you.
Thank you. And it's a sadly answer, which is you just got to do right now. You've got a few years in which you're not worrying about things that 10 or 15 years from now you're going to have to worry about. Presumably your money is together enough so you're not going to worry about where to eat or sleep during your time as an undergraduate. Presumably you are in a searching mode of trying to find out what you care about. Take full advantage of that. Find out what you respond to. Find out what people you respond to. Find out what you genuinely care about, not what you think you should care about what other people tell you. Find out what you genuinely, because if you, this is precious time, and it won't be eternal. You know, one of the big differences about the world now than 40 years ago when I came out into it is the economics are so much worse for young people. When I, you know, in the 70s, me and everybody I knew basically spent their 20s not thinking about money. You know, we spent our 20s because New York was cheap then. We could make a little money here, make a little money. We didn't have to worry about it. Now nobody is allowed to not think about money. So this, if you've got a little bit of stretch time where you're not having to worry about selling yourself or your market value, take full advantage of it. And that's going to matter more than anything you can do externally during those years. These are the years for you to forge yourself.
I would agree with that, but I would also just remind everyone about what you said about colleagues. This is a time really when
Yes.
you can nurture those relationships, find each other. You can still, if you're a director, work with a writer who is just starting a new piece and you want to be there with them and helping them shape and form that. You might even be able to do, you can do that we used to do it by phone, but you now have, you know, Zoom if you can afford that, or other ways to get together. You can even I'm starting to do rehearsals on it. I mean, there's ways to get your buddies together and dream and think and create with the tools you have. I remember in the old days, still life, I thought I would end up doing it the way Wally Shawn was doing his work at that time, which was going into people's living rooms and just performing the play, you know, to 10 people. You can do that now via Zoom. I mean, so there's ways to work and you'll find them. If possible, avoid despair and find each other and start creating. You'll find your way. If you have something to say and do, and if you can't not do anything but this, there's no stopping you, not even a pandemic.
Wisely said. And
Yes.
I'm afraid my stove is calling me, Paula. If I don't
All
cook
right,
for my family.
you can go. You are wonderful, and I'm so grateful. I have a few things to tell the viewers at home, but thank you so much, Oskar.
And what an honor to be here. And Emily, what a joy to be.
Oh, Oskar, always.
I love you.
Love you.
Thank you, Oskar.
Thank you.
So folks at home, McCarter Theater Center will continue to reach out to its audiences and communities through McCarter at Home programming. Today, we just put on sale virtual education class offerings for the month of June for children, teens, and adults. And every Monday, we will share out information about upcoming virtual community play readings, live artists and conversations such as this, behind the scenes interviews and archival footage from some of our favorite past productions. And we'll suggest fun at home activities and hopefully inspire you in your own art making. As soon as you sign out of this event, if you're on Zoom, you should be taken to the McCarter Theater website where you can sign up for McCarter at Home announcements. Please note that on Friday, May 22nd at 6:30 Eastern Time, McCarter, in partnership with the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice in Princeton and the New Jersey Theater Alliance, will be hosting a virtual community reading of Emily's Execution of Justice, which you heard about today. May 22nd marks the 90th anniversary of the birth of Harvey Milk, so we will honor Harvey. This event is also intended to celebrate Emily's 30-year legacy as artistic director and resident playwright at McCarter. It's also intended to boost the signal on the activism and advocacy of the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice on behalf of LGBTQIA kids, intersectional folks and families, and all marginalized people. And it's intended to kick off Pride Month in June and direct attention to the center's programming for Pride. So if you're interested in participating, Emily and I would both love to have you, either as a reader or as a listener. Look out in this coming Monday's McCarter at Home email. check back at McCarter's website for instructions and registration. Emily will be with us. We'll read the play and then invite all assembled to engage in a virtual talking circle to discuss the experience of the play in relation to personal residence, contemporary concerns, and current events. This event is supported in part by Stages Online, a partnership with the New Jersey Theater Alliance to bring theater content into homes during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I hope you'll feel welcome to join us. Before you leave, I want you to know about a wonderful program. I just sort of engaged with Emily over this project that Oskar Eustis at the Public Theater and some great 5 important theaters in the country have started. It's called the Play at Home project. If you go to playathome.org, you will find that playwrights have been commissioned by theaters, a number of theaters across the country, to write plays for you, our audiences at home, to create in your own home. They're intended to allow you to bring joy into your home, to employ playwrights at this time. I'm going to be trying out one that's called Fill in the Play with my own family this weekend in our Zoom room. So I really suggest that you go there to see this really great project to support playwrights and also to bring theater to your own home. So please look at that. Hello to Stephanie Ibarra and all of the folks out there who are working on that project. Thank you for creating that. Emily, I'll throw it to you to say goodnight to everyone. And thank you again, my friend, for this opportunity. And I'll see you soon again.
Yes, thank you, Paula. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And be safe, be well, stay home. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a good evening.